Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm your host, InaneDragon, and tonight I thought I'd dig into my backlog a little bit. I've got a number of bigger, more complex irons in the fire, but I thought you guys deserved a little crazy in the meantime. Tonight, we will be discussing the Nation of Islam, and in case anyone thinks I'm misrepresenting their beliefs and claims, unless otherwise stated, I'm pulling all of my information about their teachings from their own texts. This is what their self-proclaimed prophets claim to believe as they have dictated it or written it down themselves. So, what are we even talking about with the Nation of Islam? In the mythical land of Detroit at the beginning of the Great Depression, a young W.D. Fard, also known as Wallace Fard Muhammad, but most likely actually named Wally Dodd Ford based on federal records, started selling impoverished black people cheap silk products, which he claimed came from their homeland. How Chinese silks come from Africa beyond me. Wally's history was pretty poorly documented based on what the FBI could learn about the man. He was either born in Afghanistan or New Zealand. If the New Zealand origin is correct, Wally is the child of a Pakistani man and a white British woman. Whether Afghani or New Zealander, Wally was considered and self-identified as white on all federal documents right up until he started to build a cult out of his door-to-door sales routine of cheap silks and perfumes. With time, his theology developed to the point where Christianity was a tool of the devil's, or, well, white people, who used it to enslave the black man. He himself was the present incarnation of the true God Allah, whose physical incarnation changed every few hundred or thousand years, but the mental incarnation would last 25,000 years because the radius of the earth. I wish I were joking, but they repeat this repeatedly in their texts. After a happy fleecing of underclass blacks in Detroit, Wally turned things over to a fellow named Elijah Muhammad, who formalized the teachings of the Nation of Islam, claiming to have learned all he knows from Wali Allah. For his own part, Wally hopped on a plane and was never seen again. Presumably, he'll show back up when it's time to lead the black man of America to true freedom over their oppressors, which, given that he's almost certainly white, is kind of fucking funny. I wish to take a moment to point out the context of this religion. Blacks in America were facing serious discrimination and levels of hatred we genuinely have trouble even conceiving of today. This was the height of the KKK's power, the heyday of Jim Crow, the prime time of lynching. American blacks were faced with a hostile world. This was particularly true for those who had left the South for the promise of equality in the North. White fears and prejudice in northern states led to increased Klan influence and often the institution of Jim Crow laws or policies. Having been denied the very equality they had sought, made them perfect targets for a cult that preyed on their justified fears and ostracization. This is not a critique of those people Wally and his successor Elijah dragged into their quackery. This is a critique of Wally and Elijah and the religion they formed. This is a critique of their truth claims about the world. This is a critique of those still following the obviously false teachings which we are about to dive into. The Nation of Islam teaches a millennialist doctrine that, in the near future, Wali Allah, in the form of Wally Ford, will wage a final war against the devil, that is, white people, in space. After Wally beats the white man, then the black civilization of God's scientists will be restored. Why does Wali Allah need to do this? Because 6,000 years ago, a god scientist named Yakub used grafting to create white people. Somehow this works for reasons. Ever heard a black supremacist talk about how whites have reduced genetics, or they play up the Neanderthal DNA that shows up in whites and Asians, etc.? Well, the Nation of Islam is where much of that line of crap comes from. From Yakub's work, we get all the races other than black. The earliest generations of Yakub's grafting programs became the brown peoples of the Middle East and Southern Asia. Next came the Reds of the America. To be clear, this is the Nation of Islam's term for these people, not mine. And, of course, those yellow Asiatics, please don't punch me. Elijah Muhammad said it first. Then finally white people, or devils. More or less. I'm probably oversimplifying for the sake of my own sanity. The black peoples of the world, recognizing the danger of Yakub's devil race, denied white people access to technology and education, trapping them in the cold caves of Europe and the Caucasus Mountains. Then Musa, their name for Moses, liberated the whites because reasons, taught them the sorcerous technology of Tricknology, which ultimately empowered the white people to destroy black civilization and take power for millennia! Apparently all of this is some plan to intentionally punish the black races for reasons that are again not well explained. But now that time is coming to an end. Wali Allah will arrive in his great sky wheel to free the tribe of Shabazz from the white man and restore the power of the god scientists to Earth. What the hell is a sky wheel and who are the tribe of Shabazz? I regret you asking that question. When the time of the war between Wali Allah and the white people comes, a giant mothership shaped like a wheel is supposed to launch 1,500 fighter craft to help defeat the white devils. This is a bit bizarre, since all of nature is supposed to fight on the side of the black races. Wherever the white man looks for the wheel in the sky, it will not be there. Because, reasons. All 4 races of the black race, meaning anyone but Whitey, will crew the mothership because Wali Allah needs a ship's crew to defeat mere mortals despite being God. Look, I'll be honest, I don't know what kind of shit Elijah Muhammad was smoking when he pulled this crap out of Ezekiel chapter 1. It's kind of odd for a so-called Muslim prophet to cite the Bible. Then again, as Muhammad was supposedly the last prophet of Allah, it's kind of odd for there to be a new prophet of Allah, even if this Allah happens to be named Wali. The point is, for some reason, there will be a half-mile diameter wheel, a half-mile thick, that can last a year without a resupply of oxygen and hydrogen, which are apparently the only things life on Earth requires, as no mention of food is listed in the logistics section of the Nation of Islam. Can we not make me read all of the different mutually contradictory texts published by the Nation of Islam that offer up contradictory explanations of the Great Sky Wheel? The current leader of the Nation of Islam publicly tries to pretend this shit never came out of his prophet's mouth. Fuck. Next topic, Shazam! Even before the rise of Yakub, but presumably after the construction of the mega super awesome sky wheel, a mere 66 trillion years ago, there was a god scientist who wanted all the black people of Asia to speak a single language. Because despite having a unified body politic, culture, and society, everyone was apparently speaking different languages. Look, don't try to understand this shit, just run with it, okay? So, what happened when he failed to get his unified populace to unify their language? He blew up the world!
Of course!
In the process of blowing up the world, this god scientist broke the moon away from the Earth and blew the water off of the moon. That's why we don't have black people on the moon today. The survivors were the children of the god-king scientist Shabazz, and they settled the Nile and founded the city of Baghdad. This wasn't good enough for a god scientist descended from Shabazz, however. So, 50,000 years ago, he and a number of Shabazz's direct descendants struck out from Baghdad for East Asia and the fabled land of Africa. No, I didn't get my directions wrong. According to the Nation of Islam's founders, Africa is in East Asia. Why did Shabazz wander into the jungles of Africa? Why, to gain darker skin and kinky hair, of course. And that's why the African American has dark skin and kinky hair. Please don't shoot me. This is their words, not mine. I wish I were making this up, but this is precisely what is taught in the various books and speeches by Elijah Muhammad and his predecessor, Wally Ford. These books are still published and sold by the Nation of Islam, even as leaders like Louis Farrakhan attempt to downplay the teachings of the man they call their prophet and the man that they call Allah. This is a religion born in the racist strife of the early 20th century, so perhaps we can understand the demonization of whites and the glorification of blacks. But the historical and scientific accuracy is laughable even by the standards of someone used to flat earthers and young earth creationists. Particularly the irony that this all started with a white con man convincing his neighbors to worship him as a black god come to save them from the white devil. Let me remind you that the Inane Explanations are a brief and superficial introduction. They help me learn about a new topic by explaining it to you, my audience. Even with just the little reading that I've done so far, I could make videos for years about the Nation of Islam. The same is true for many other topics. Whether or not I do so depends in part on whether you let me know you're interested in hearing more. As always, I'm InaneDragon, but I won't be pushing my Patreon until I get myself back into regular video production. Good night, everyone. I need a drink.